we got presented this tobacco, and in my teachings that have been told to me is, when you get offered or asked something and tobacco is offered, it's kind of like a, can you do what I'm asking kind of thing. And then if I hold it, it's like a promise and I'm accepting that to say that, I can deliver what you're asking of me, that within my resources, my power, my knowledge that I have, that I can do what you're asking of me. And so UAVS is asked if we could come and talk a little bit about Powwow or Buat Sunawin. And me and my wife, Marissa here, accepted this tobacco to come and say what we know, basically. And I want to talk a little bit about that, but before that, my mother, my nimama, said that, if you go somewhere, new people, new crowd, any environment, to introduce yourself in your language and to speak your language as much as you could. And we're going to kind of explain that and how that ties in with powwow. So I want to introduce myself to you guys in my native tongue, so to speak, my indigenous language, and speak it the best way that I know how, as I'm just learning as well. So, dansa, Patrick Mitsung Nixigasun, Mako Sagagana no Chinia, Nanaskaman Naitumig, Bibisquian, Egua Giapsis Nihio Sigasun. With the stemao, Nutawinan Gichimantu, Wichinan Mina Ganawemnan and Nuchka Gisigak, Nianan Gitawasimsak, Napiwak, Napisak, Esquewak, Esquisak, Iguagakio Gutaka, Kasinawak, Kutaskik, Gitata Minan, hi.
Tansu, my name is Marissa Mitsuing, and I am the wife and partner of Pat, and we're so thankful to be here today to talk about Powwow. And just to play off what he said there, one of our elders told us that one of the most beautiful things that you do when you enter a room, when you introduce yourself in your language, that the land remembers and the air remembers, and it's your whole energy and your whole being, your whole spirit, and you carry the people that came before you. And so we always encourage the introductions in your native tongue. So thank you for that.
When I go to powwows and they have a speaker up, and a lot of time the men will say it, and I just have to say it's good that I have my wife here, because I'll come most times at that male perspective of things. So it's good to have that balance with my wife. And the men warriors will come up and they'll speak and they'll say, forgive me, pity me. I'm not worthy, right? And a lot of that, I'm starting to learn more and more about it. And it's good to have Elder Maggie here and elders around to give that knowledge to us younger people growing up so we could pass it on. And so today I'll ask for forgiveness, because what I say about powwow might not be what you learned about it, and that's okay. And you might have learned a different perspective about it. And what I learned from our elders, and I just want to acknowledge them before we speak, some of the elders that were really key in our lives to learning about powwow, like Tommy Christian from Poplar, Montana, a great elder, a great MC in the powwow world. The late Jason Goodstriker from the Siksika area, to get that Blackfoot perspective. Cecil Nipus, an elder from the Musqueam area, to give us that perspective of the Cree. Sharon Baptiste, from where's that, Sweetgrass or Red Pheasant area, Palmaker area, to get that woman perspective from a Cree version. And all those people that we met throughout the powwow trail, that it helped us kind of give that knowledge to you. So it wasn't ours, it wasn't theirs, it was passed on. And what some of the elders told us is, when you go somewhere, you don't tell them what to do. But if you're invited, you could add what you know to add to the experience. And so what we're doing is just adding to you guys based on your knowledge of what you already have, just to add another layer to it, that it's a cool another perspective, and you'd be like, wow, that's cool, I didn't know that story, right? Because we've been fortunate enough to be powwow dancers that travel all over North America, And when I'm in Florida, or I'm in Houston, Texas, or I'm in the Mohawk territory of Six Nations, that I always hear different stories and different versions, and I don't say, hey, that's wrong, right? I take it in and say, that's a beautiful version of that story and how it all kind of connects together. And I love finding those connections of our indigenous cultures, how a lot of that connects. So today I'll ask for forgiveness to say, this is just what we've heard. And it's not to step on anyone's toes to say our way is the right way, but it's just what was passed down to us. So today we're talking about powwow, and I just want to maybe start off with a story, kind of how we got into powwow and how it started for us. So when I was young, my dad left when I was as a young kid. I was 4 years old, and he left, and I didn't know where he went after that. I haven't heard from him since. And then my mom left shortly afterwards. And the beautiful thing about indigenous culture, we have this kinship where, a community really raises a child. If you're on a reservation, you'd really feel that. And so part of that was me moving into different homes. Different aunties and uncles became mom and dad. And I happened to be lucky enough to go into a family who was really traditional. Sweat lodge ceremony was normal in that household. The Cree language was normal to be spoken, so I was listening to the Cree language a lot. And round dances, going to round dances. And what was really cool was every summer was powwow time. So I remember at 8 years old going to my first powwow, and I showed up, and it was like I didn't know what it was at first, but to me it was like a fair, because I went to a fair before. I seen all these people running around, laughing, visiting, concession stands around the corner. And so I thought it was something like that. And so I went out and I started playing around with the kids, just like how normal little kids do, getting all dirty, snotty nose. And then I heard a loud cheer come from the arbor, and I was like, what is that? I remember just going and running, and I kind of weaved through all the people, and what I seen, time just slowed down for me. And it was the first time I've seen fancy dancing. And I was like, I don't know what that is, I don't know what they're doing, but I'm going to do that. And so science, we talk about like blood memory and how it's embedded in our DNA, our memory of our ancestors coming down to us. And so I instantly had a connection with that drum. And it's funny, when you guys might notice that when little kids hear powwow, they start dancing as if they heard it all their lives, but it might be the first time that they've ever heard it. It's that, to me, I believe it's that blood memory that was already there, right? That connection with that drum. So when I started off my talk, I'm going to come back to that story. When I started off my talk, I said, Patrick Mitsung Nixigasan. Marissa said, Marissa Nixigasan. I said, Giapsis Nixiga, or Nihio Sigasan. Giapsis, my indigenous name, is that frost on the trees, right? So when I said Nixigasan, our indigenous languages are really beautiful languages. And I feel like when you speak English, it doesn't give it justice when I say my name is, right? Patrick Mitsung, that's my name, or my name is Patrick Mitsung. But if I say it in Cree, Nixigasan Patrick Mitsung, or Patrick Mitsung Nixigasan, I'm talking about my belly button connection to my mother. That Nixigasan, I'm connected to my mother. So with my connection with my mother, when she eats and I'm a baby, she's feeding me to grow, right? And her connection, Nixigasan, to her mother, to her mother, to her mother, that she comes from all these generations of knowledge, of culture, of beauty, of heritage, that I come from that. I come from my mother, Nixigasan, right? And so when we think of the woman, Nixigasan, I come from my mother, I'm connected to her. Isquil, right? Isquil is what our female is. Iskatil is that fire. And if you think of the sun like that fire, without the sun, right, we perish. Without our mother's love, or without our mother feeding us through that incubation period, right? That's how we live, we survive. So when we think of powwow and you have the women on the outside, they're looking in, that's that fire. They're giving us that warmth. And if you think of in modern terms of a furnace in a house, that heat is heating up the whole building. That fire, iskito, from our iskwil, our connection to our mother. So we always have held kind of women in high regards, and that's what's been taught to me, is that how I treat my wife now, that my kids are watching dad, how I treat mom is kind of similar to how they're going to treat their future wife. So it's very important for me as a man to respect, especially in front of my kids. It's so important, right? And then part of me, knowing that I'm also half female, there's a female part of me that I need that balance. So when we're in a powwow, you'll see in circles, a lot of our ceremonies will have the men and the women to balance off that ceremony, to balance off what we're doing. And that's just what's been taught to me, to have that respect for that and for the women. And so when we're teaching, to have that, also that female perspective to it, as well that male perspective. So I saw fancy dance and I was blown away. And I was like, I don't know what this is. I have to learn it. So when I went home and I seen that these dancers were wearing all these beautiful colored feathers. And I've never seen that before. But I live by a lake, Makwasagagan, Loon Lake. And so the next morning I took my bike and I biked to the lake, Sagagan. And I picked up all the seagull feathers that I could find, because that's where I knew that there was feathers. And I grabbed a whole bunch and I biked home. And part of that, I remembered, what did they have? They had these sticks and they were swinging them around like nunchucks, and I kind of put it towards like Ninja Turtles, Michelangelo with his nunchucks, and he's swinging them around. That's how I seen it, but with these beautiful feathers. And so I grabbed some sticks and I grabbed some string and I duct taped all these feathers together, and I made my first pair of dance sticks. And I was like, where did they get these nice, beautiful colors? I was like, oh yeah. I ran inside my uncle's house and I jumped on a chair. I went on top of the fridge in the cupboard, and I remembered all his bingo dabbers were there, and I bingo dabbed all those feathers, all beautiful, different colors, and these were my sticks. And my uncle, he had all this collection of powwow music, and they were cassette tapes. I don't know if some of you guys watching this know what cassette tapes are, but I put them in the stereo, and I'd play these fancy dance songs, and just off of memory, right? There was no YouTube that I could look at the time, or Facebook videos, but just off of memory, as if I had it embedded in me, this blood memory as well, I would dance every single day to powwow at 8 years old. And I would dance and I would dance and I would dance. And my uncle would be watching me. He's like, he wants to be a dancer. He is observing me and my passion for it and how much I wanted to dance. On my 13th birthday, 5 years later, we're at Thunderchild Powwow. And he's like, nephew, come, let's go for a walk. It's like, okay. I went for a walk to this camp. In this camp, there's this guy with a long, one of those long old cars, where like nowadays just the trunk part is the size of a normal car. And he's like, come here. Opens up the trunk and pulls out this purple fancy dance outfit. And my eyes went so big, my jaw dropped to the ground, and I couldn't believe it. It was my first powwow outfit on my 13th birthday. I remember that day as if it was yesterday. Beautiful blue skies, not too much clouds. It was a nice warm day with a slight breeze. And we went and walked to, which would be Sim Thunderchild. He's a fancy dancer, long-time fancy dancer in the powwow world. And so I got this outfit and I danced and I danced and I danced. And literally the elders would say, take care of your outfit. It'll take you places. And they say that to drummers too, take care of this drum. It'll take you places. I never understood what that meant. But I took care of my outfit and I learned certain characteristics that indigenous people, they teach. Respect, right? Discipline. And how to have that respect for my outfit. And nowadays I see my wife here, she's a beader, and she's going to talk about her beadwork. And she creates these beautiful outfits. So beautiful with all kinds of designs. And she's going to talk about those designs as well. And she hours and hours and bloody fingers making these outfits. And our sons wear them and they throw them on the floor after dancing. Oh, I'm hot. Boom. right? That's that chance to teach that respect. Son, you know what went into this outfit, right? All the work that Nimama did, right? For you, so you could be dancing. And then they clue in on that, and they, from this environment of powwow, they're learning things. How to listen to elders when they're talking, when they're doing a giveaway, how to be quiet around a circle. When they're the discipline of learning songs, they have this thing called getting bucked off. So that means when the song's going and it stops, but you're still dancing, you got bucked off, right? That the song beat you, it tricked you. So to next time to hear that song, they know it, so they adjust. And then that teaches them things in life. When things don't go their way, and if it happens again, they know what to do. And they learn that through this environment of powwow. So I was learning as a young kid all of this stuff on how to treat people, on how to listen, and how to carry myself as a man. And also it was a connection to my culture that I wouldn't have otherwise had. Different perspectives from different cultures, different perspective from different men, and also from women as well, that I could have to be able to be in this environment right now to speak about it. Otherwise I would not have taken that tobacco, because I wouldn't have not known what to say, right? But it's because I learned at a young age to pay attention to what's going on. Because he said one time, there'll be one day where you'll need this. I didn't understand that till now. There'll be one time where you're gonna need this, and I tell my kids that, and I can tell right now that they don't quite understand yet, that there'll be one time where they're gonna need this stuff. And so I soaked in everything I could about learning about powwow. And when I was 16 years old, I moved out on my own. And now I moved from the reserve to the city of Saskatoon. And for me, it was a cultural shock, but also almost a disconnection from my culture being on reserve. And I got in a little point where I was losing kind of who I was, or that Nixigas and where I come from, my connection to not only my mother, but my whole culture. And one day I was chilling, right, in my house. We had this guy kind of put us up, me and my 4 friends, and we became brothers. And we're just in the house, and it was a hot summer day, and I was downstairs with the air conditioning on. And one of those hot days where you don't want to go outside, you start sweating right away, and you're like, I don't want to go outside. And my brother Jeff said, let's go for a ride. Come on. No, I don't want to. And we used to go get these big gulps at 7-Eleven all the time. And come on, let's go get a drink. Let's go cool off. Let's go outside. And I'm like, I'm downstairs, and it's nice air conditioning. I don't want to go anywhere. And then finally, reluctantly, I was like, okay, I'll go. And I usually sit beside him in front. It's always me and him, and then our friends in the back. But this time I sat in the back, and we're on the east side of Saskatoon, and we drive to the west side of Saskatoon, and we turn on Avenue T South on 20th Street. And as we're driving, there's this apartment building, and this door opens, and it's the second time slows down for me. The first time was when I seen fancy dancing. I was like, I don't know what that is. I got to do it. The second time, this beautiful woman walks out of the apartment building, and her hair is blowing in the wind, nice and slow motion. I don't know if you guys ever seen Hollywood when that slow motion part happens. And I was like, who is that? I know who that is. And it was my future wife, Marissa. And I did all I could, because we had the flip phone. There wasn't no touch phone. And you know where you had to press the button a bunch of times to get one letter? Hey, could you tell me? And I was trying to get her phone number. And finally, eventually I got her number, and I started bugging her. And she finally agreed to hang out with me. And I think we connected very well after that. And since then, we've been together for how long now? 12 years? 13 years? 13 years. And together, we were kind of lost in the beginning, trying to figure out life. And kind of where we finally got our act together was where we just kind of let go and said, let's be Indigenous. Let's figure out our ways. And when we had our first son, he became a dancer right when he could walk, and we kind of just went into this world of powwow. No worries, it's all good. What we found out, and I'm gonna let Marissa talk here pretty soon. Sorry, I've been just taking over. What we found out was and this was some elder Tommy Christian talking to me, sitting down with me from Poplar, Montana. Our educational system that we have now in schools, grade K to 12, is very linear, where arithmetic, mathematics, memory is really important, right? To know how to read, write, basic math, and all stuff like that. And he said indigenous culture is a little different. It's more abstract. It's more, you experience it, you're involved in it, you're doing it, right? So it's not based on theory, it's based on by doing. So when you're a part of it and you're doing it, like I could teach you guys about dance, but you won't fully understand dance until you put on an outfit and you're dancing, if that makes sense, right? I could talk to you about a sweat and what it is, but you won't fully know unless you're inside a sweat lodge and experiencing it. And so that's what the elder told me is like a cool thing about our indigenous way of education and our culture is we teach our kids by doing, right? And their report card won't be how much they memorized it, but by them seeing them speak the language slowly, right? Seeing them dance, seeing them make a bow and arrow, or seeing them cut up a moose, right? That they can do it, and that's kind of that learning, and that's that report card by them doing it, and eventually getting to a point which is really, really hard to get to. You might never get to it, is that fully understanding of it. Because what we found out, the more you know, the more you don't know, that there's more depths to it, and you just keep going in your journey. Like I said, you're just going to add layers to it over and over again. And so Marissa started doing beadwork for us, and I want her to talk about her inspiration of how she does her beadwork.
So my story looked a lot different than Patrick. Both my parents are products of residential school, and my mom was awesome because my mom seen sort of the effects of my dad. My dad is an alcoholic, and he's probably not going to be. And we did not grow up in any sort of traditional setting at all. My parents barely spoke the language in my home unless we were in trouble. And so you can see how my connection also with the language, okay, when they speak Cree, I'm in trouble. And that was what they were taught as well in being in these schools, is when they speak Cree or when they are who they are, that's trouble. And so I got the same sort of connect. And there was no real sort of culture type anything in my house. So I grew up in the church, and my house was really, really chaotic growing up as well. With my dad being an alcoholic, there was always alcohol in the house and not food. Or, we had utilities that were not paid and going to get cut off, but we had alcohol in the house. It was such a weird dynamic, and I had no understanding of who I was as a Cree woman or anything like that. So when I started when me and Pat started dating, and he was dancing, and he was really fully immersed in a lot of things, and meeting his family who are fluent speakers or who do other ceremonies and different things like that. It was such a beautiful thing for me to take in all of that, and all these bad habits that I picked up as a child from my environment. They really, just as I got older, they really started to sprout. And a lot of the issues that I had really showed up in my relationships. And that was like employers and friends and even like romantic relationships. Those things showed up there. And it took me a while to be like, I need to sort this out. It was too painful for me to continue to carry. And one of the things that sort of catapulted me into a healing journey was beading. And my first introduction ever to beading, my kukum raised me for the first few years of my life, me and my older siblings, while my mom went to university. So the university was 3 hours away, and we were in the res. And my kukum had that tin can with the cookies in there, where you think there's cookies in there, but there's not, and it's just a bunch of beads. That was at my kukum's house. And I remember that, and I remember the beads, and I remember how the hide smelled just when you open the can. And I remember the colors and the flowers. They were so simple, and they were just so beautiful. And that was my first introduction. That's the first time I ever seen it. And I remember putting my hand in there, and now my daughter does the same thing to all of my beads. She'll just like touch them, and it brings back all these really beautiful memories for me. When I started to bead, one of the first things that I learned, and the thing with Powwow is it's sort of all-encompassing, because there's so many different lessons in it. So the first thing was patience. I don't like the project. I go back, I give it some time, I do it again. I'll go back till it's perfect, till it's the way I like it. And cutting beads out, I don't know if I like these colors together, cutting them out, starting over. Patience, a really beautiful, beautiful thing. And it's simple. It's so simple, but Powwow has also given us a lot of that stuff, just these simple things. One of the things that Pat didn't bring up, but that we've been able to, that neither of us learned from our parents, or we didn't learn it at school, was about financial literacy. Giving back. Our kids do that now. So every time they win, they give. And that's such a beautiful lesson. Things that we didn't know, and things that they're doing on their own, just seeing other people and being around an environment where, they see a kukum and they'll go give her a hug. And there's so many small things that come from it. And with the beadwork, with my family going all over, that was also something that I never saw for myself when I was a kid. I thought that I'd sort of be in the res, or sort of in the town that I grew up with my whole life, and there was so many things that I never saw myself doing, and starting with beadwork. A lot of my inspiration comes from my kukum's backyard. It's sort of the place that I grew up, and definitely where I felt the safest in throughout my childhood. So my thing, I love beading the florals, and I feel a connection to my kukum every single time I'm working on something that has to do with florals or flower. I love being out in the land. I love sitting beside trees. I love touching the grass. I love looking at wildflowers. I love smelling them. And I take that energy when I'm creating, and I sort of want all of that morphed in, so that whenever he's wearing it, or my children are wearing whatever I create, that they feel all that good energy, and they feel home, and they feel they're represented properly. And I had a point that I was going to say, and now I don't think I sorry, were you? Yes, so in my grandma's backyard, there's so many wildflowers. And there's this awesome hill that goes up. It's like and there's water at the bottom. And anytime I get to go home, I just walk there and I take a bunch of pictures. And the bees there feel different from the bees that are at my home now. And the grass feels different, and it just feels like home. And I feel that. And so when I teach beading or beading classes as well, that to find inspiration in things that make you happy, or that have ever made you feel safe, or when someone asks me to create for them as well, that's a thing where we have a good conversation. What do you want when someone looks at you, how do you want to be represented? Is it your tribe? Is it your Cree name or your traditional name? Is it a certain moment in your life? And being able to express myself in an outlet like beading, and that's just a single one that Powwow has given me or has introduced me to. But in that space, I feel like I'm doing hard work.
So, just to add on to what Marissa said, like her learning those things that give us a way of navigating life. So when she's learning patience and our little baby is screaming, to have that patience with our baby, right? Or like our kid, to know that they're just finding their belly buttons. That's why they're kind of confused about where they're navigating. And so for Marissa and I, we just happened to choose, and I think because it was available to us more than anything else, powwow as a way of our door, our footstep into indigenous, they call it Nehio Mamta Nichiga Ne Bachita, an indigenous way of thinking. And when we said, let's be indigenous, and powwow was just right at our front door for us, that it was natural for us to go that route to learn about our culture through powwow, which is, I feel like so beautiful to us, as now we're expanding into the Sundance, and we're expanding into the Sweat Lodge and our language and the land-based learning. And so that the powwow has been our route. And through that, we've heard different stories of where this originated from.
And I think that's one of our favorite parts too with powwow, is that at any given powwow, there's so many people from so many different places, and that these friendships form into relationships where these people feel like family.
Yeah, through like kinship, we learn kinship in a greater depth because of powwow. Meaning, we travel to California, we have an adopted mom there that will take us in and feed us and hug us and love us as if we're their kids. And then we travel east and we go to Oklahoma, and it's the same thing. The Roberts, they open up their door, they feed us, they hug us, we go hang out. They're family. We learn the Oklahoma ways of like indigenous ways of thinking, and we could literally go almost anywhere now, and we have like that kinship, that adopted family, thanks to this world of powwow. And I feel like it's the same thing. If you're a sun dancer, if you're in Sweat Lodge, if you do other kind of ceremonies, you're gonna find that kinship with those people, and that's just kind of been what we found in our culture that's really prevalent, which is really cool. So, going to powwows, in a segue like this, newcomers that come to Canada, if they're like Irish or German or French or Russian or Chinese, a very neat thing about them is they can come to Canada and they could absolutely, next generation after that, not know anything about their culture. They might not know their language, their songs, their dances, their heritage, but at any point they could go to the airport, buy a ticket, go back to their home country and learn everything about their culture. If you go to German words is written on the airport. People are speaking German. You can go and see the dances and their culture. For us, if it's lost here, there's nowhere we could buy a ticket to another country to learn about it fully and to experience it like that. So we learned that it's so important to sit down, grab tobacco, and sit down with your elder and try get that knowledge, because they're like this huge library of information. And now's the time. My grandparents, my Guka Mushum, their first language was Cree. My parents, their first language was Cree mixed with English. My generation, my first language was English. Upsis Bigo, Nahioan, little bit Cree, tiny bit. I'm just learning. My kids right now, it's almost like a tipping point where I have to teach them before it's lost. And so that knowledge is based on this land. And so when I go to powwows and I get this tobacco and I talk to elders. I like to talk about powwow because that's kind of the area that we're in, and that's what we're talking about today. And so I sat down with, I'll come back to Tommy Christian from Poplar, Montana, and he talked about powwow as a way of storytelling, and how warriors went out to battle or hunt, and they had these coup sticks. Basically, you'll see these rocks on a stick, and it was more honorable for a warrior to get coup on an enemy than to kill them, to humiliate them, and that they would count coup. And he explained how these men would have paint on their faces, and they would rarely change that style of paint, because when they tell those stories, they could say it was that guy with this certain paint that did this coup, and he would count that coup, and he'd be honored for that. And so part of that, let's just put it within that coup and that dancing and that honorability that they got, they'd come back and they'd celebrate those coups, right, as one form, and they would dance. And that just became almost like a way of life, as if when we wake up and we smudge is a way of life. That was just part of that way of life that they had. And that was like the basis of that. And so some stories that came into this area for the Cree that was taught to me by Cecil Nipus and Sharon Baptiste elders, they say that the word, we say it in Cree, Boatsimuin, but Boata in Cree is the Sioux people. And that came from that Sioux dance, right, that they had from telling those stories. But also within the Cree, we had a version of dancing which was a lot like the grass dance that you see now, because they didn't have a bustle, but they would be dancing more like a chicken style without a bustle, if that makes sense. But they call them grass dance societies. And then Cecil Nipus talked about, there's this old man, 1800s, they had this dream about this thunderbird came down, and when he came down in his dream, he turned into a man, and he told that man to come for a walk. And they went up this hill, and at the top of the hill, they heard dancing, or the drum, and there was people dancing. He's like, come with me, nephew, let's go down here. And he walked down, and when he got down there was no people, but there was a drum. But he seen these grass kind of swaying, and he heard that drum, and that elder, or that spirit, was talking to him, saying, I want you to learn this and to bring this to the people. And then those grass were swaying, kind of formed into those grass dancers that he's seen, and how those would eventually become our scouts. Those people that went out and scouted, our warriors, our brave people. And he's seen this rock, and then within this rock, that there was this puppy in there. And then they ended up eating that puppy. And it was the part of that puppy ceremony that you hear now, and mainly you'll hear now in Siksika areas, they still really carry that puppy ceremony. And they ate this puppy, and they danced, and that origins from what this elder heard was that powwow originated from that puppy ceremony and came into powwows. Nowadays, it's a very social gathering where different tribes will come, and they have intertribals, meaning every tribe is welcome. And it's just a beautiful thing, because we'll go to a powwow as a family, and we'll see other families that we just only see within that time. And it brings us so much joy, because it's our friends. And I heard a story about powwow Ujiji. They translated like that. The elder in Eastern said that word kind of translated into visiting after winter, to talk about how we survived the winter, right? Because winters were always hard during that time. We couldn't just turn on the thermostat and go to Sobeys and buy a steak, right? It was those natural elements we had to deal with, the cold. How do we keep warm? How do we feed our families? Are there buffalo around, right? And if you survive that winter, you'd come and you'd celebrate and you'd visit and you'd tell stories. This is how I survived the winter. And I just thought that was very beautiful, that story that I heard, right? And so that Puata, they said that the Sioux kind of had their dance and they were spreading it around too. And that's why the Cree word, they also had that word Puat-Samoan from the Sioux people, which is really cool. And so part of powwow, it evolved into many different dance styles and many different cultures adding to it. And I'll go back to what I said in the beginning, right? We don't go somewhere and tell them what to do and how to do things. But if you're invited, you'll just add to it. Powwow is like that representation of that exact teaching, is all these tribes, and I went to so many different powwows where they did it slightly different. And I've never said that's not how you do it, but a new layer of it. In Washington, they'll have a bell, and they'll have that bell before the grand entry, right? Some tribes, they'll do counterclockwise for their intertribals, and different types of dances in different areas. The smoke dance, right? The Apache dance. There's so many, the hoop dance. It's all different areas. You'll find it's a little different, but it's still where all these tribes are coming together and they're adding their uniqueness. They're adding their tribe within it, and it's a really cool learning experience to get those lessons from different areas and to have that reverence and respect for different cultures.
So for each dance that we have here in the exhibit, we try to go with an array of people who represented different tribes or who had a very unique style on their own. And a lot of times with beadwork, you can tell what tribe someone comes from, or sort of where they started, or things like that. So especially with my family, I do a lot of Cree and a lot of florals, a lot of nature-based things that I found around Treaty 6 area. And that, even just witnessing that, different tribes and the way that they do the way that they do their cloth work or their beadwork, or the way they have their feathers, it's such a beautiful thing to see that it's not all the same. All the ones in Canada are not all the same, but everywhere, everyone does it a little different, and it's so beautiful to be a part of that process.
Mm-hmm. And so there's different protocols that you start learning, and protocols, a way of doing things, as if I was presented tobacco. That's a protocol for me to share this knowledge, right? You go to a powwow, a lot of those protocols, they'll start off with the pipe, and they'll pray with that pipe. And just to learn what needs to be done in certain orders, and the respect, and that the learning that is still there for us on all aspects of it. And so I started learning about powwow, and you start asking questions to elders, like, why do they bring in the eagle staff? You know, what is that? Right? And you'll see that eagle staff come in before the flags, right? And so I sat down with an elder, Tommy, and I was like, why did they do that? And he's like, well, my nephew, he calls me nephew, it's kinship already, adopted me as a nephew. It's like, you know, that used to be a spear, that eagle staff. And because we were a warrior society, and we found out that it was really against our nature to take another person's life. And the more that we created relationships with other tribes, the more we knew that benefited us to be one, right? And so when they went into battle, they would take this eagle staff as their flag going into battle. And they decided, you know, at one point that it's time like the story of the men's fancy, how they were battling. Those tribes in Oklahoma were battling each other, and the one tribe had the horse, and having a horse was a great advantage in battle. And they decided to have a truce, a treaty. We have treaties, right? That to not fight anymore. And so they traded songs and ceremonies for horses, and they traded that. And what they found out, when these guys were singing these brand new songs that they were gifted, the horses would be moving around. And the little kids would be laughing and like kind of mimicking that horse. And the Gukums would say, hey, you guys don't do that. Those are songs for the horse. And you know how kids are. Sometimes they won't listen and they'll keep dancing, And that was one story of how that men's fancy originated in Oklahoma, was seeing that and mimicking that horse spirit and how that horse danced and moved around. And that's why men's fancy is really fast-paced. It's really jumping around and quick like a horse. And so when they had that spirit going into battle, just like that truth of like how you shouldn't, it'd be easier not to fight amongst each other, they bent that steer, that eagle staff. And that's why he said to me, that's why that in his teachings, what was passed down to him of that crooked stick, of how they had that leading the way in the grand entry, but also representation of those warriors that were in battle, that now it's peace. Now we could come together and that. But he also explained to me how in powwow, when they came back from a battle, they would cheer and they'd start singing and dancing, that originally that grand entry wasn't even a part of the powwow. It was borrowed from the rodeo, right? The rodeo had the grand entries, and the rodeos had honored their princess and the numbers. And that's kind of what we evolved from that, taking that and having we had royalty within our tribes, but to actually have a princess representation like that is like from the rodeo, that he was explaining to me how that, what he was taught, how that came about. So it's cool when I watch a powwow and I see that, how much history and how that all evolved, and that I'm dancing, I'm a Cree from Treaty 6 territory in Makwasagagan, but I'm dancing a dance from Oklahoma.
One of the other stories that we also heard about the staff is that the reason it goes before the flags was because before there were flags, that's what we went in with. So there have been people who say, why do you carry the eagle staff before the flags? And before there were flags, before there was an American flag or a Canadian flag, that was the flag that we had used.
Mm-hmm. And then, so I'm sitting there at a powwow, and I watched the eagle staff come in, and I watched the flags come in, and I watched the veterans come in. And I love going to shake a veteran's hand. And when I dance, the elders and the veterans are always in front. So I always make it kind of a mental note that when I dance, I'm going to spend most of my time dancing in front of them, for them, give them what I could. And these veterans, they all signed up to go to war, and they weren't, it was all voluntary. They didn't have to go, being indigenous. And there was this thing called enfranchisement, that if you went to war, you would lose your indigenous rights, but they went anyway. And I talked to some of them, kind of getting their perspective of why. And for them, it was no question with our ways of thinking, that Nehio Mamte Nichigan, Bachita, the 7 generations, they were already thinking of our generations ahead, not just themselves, that they had to go and fight for our culture. So when they left and they lost their rights, they started to come together, and they realized that they didn't have the same rights as other Canadian veterans when they came back, with all the help that they got, kind of coming back into society. And they decided to fight, saying, we want our rights recognized, our indigenous rights, our cultures, because that point in time, we're talking about 1920s to late 1940s, all those, when the residential schools were starting to happen, our culture was being really disrupted. Like Marissa said, her Gukum was afraid to teach the language because he didn't want her kids to get in trouble, because that's what they were taught in residential schools. If I speak my language, I get punished. If I sing my songs, I get punished. So an elder, Sharon, said, we hid our rattles and we hid our drums and we hid them underneath in certain areas. That way they wouldn't take them from us. And those were our ceremonial stuff. And when the veterans came back and they started fighting for us, fighting for our rights, it wasn't until about 1950s where they say and even though they were sneaking around doing powwows already, but we were kind of allowed to just finally celebrate powwows in the area. So they dug up the drums, they dug up the rattles, and they brought back their songs, and a lot of it off memory, a lot of it of kind of what it was passed down to them, which I think is very beautiful to know that. And they would start gathering, and some of the early powwows were like in this area, like Standing Buffalo and Thunderchild area, Onion Lake, over in southern Alberta as well. And they'd have this little mini powwow trail. And although everyone had their society, the women already had their songs, their dances, men had their dances, but powwow itself, what I heard is it was a men kind of doing, where they would sing, and then the women, Sharon said, would ask the elders, can we be a part of this? And they were saying no, like this is the hunters and the warriors coming back from battle. But eventually the women started coming around, and they would support their men by dancing on the outside. And it's really cool to see that at a powwow now, where all the women are surrounding all the men in the inside. And it's that isquetil, that fire, that warmth, that love, that protection. They're all looking in to make sure everything is good, everything is safe.
One of the cool little side note tidbits that we learned every time we go to a powwow, we pick something up, or we make it a point to do it. And one time we were speaking with Howard Walker, and he said that the women before, when their man would bring something back home that they've hunted, that the women would wear their hooves around their wrists or around their arms, and that was a way to honor their men that went out and provided for their family.
Mm-hmm. And now, if I bring it to modern terms, like if I go hunting and I get something, it's like a celebration still in the house, that we get to, give thanks for that animal, and that we're able to eat at our house and use that animal for things within our house and within the powwow world that we do. And so we use this whole area of powwow to learn, to become a man for myself, become a woman, to our relationship together, and our kids to kind of learn the culture, learn the language, be exposed to it. And Tommy Christian said it pretty good. He's like, you'll never become rich being a dancer in terms of like money and wealth. And he's like, the reason is because as an indigenous person, we're always taught to share even what little we have. And we found that the better dancer that I became in terms of winning powwows, the bigger my envelope came with money in it, that the more people we helped. Because there's a lot of dancers that don't place, and they need to make it to the next powwow. Here's some gas money. Here's some that way of giving back. And I feel like that has served us so well, that just that characteristic of whatever we could do and whatever we're asked of, to try to give more than what we're asked of. That you can't, and we found that you can't be like rich if you just do 100% just dancing, right? Because we're always giving back, and we teach our kids that when they win, to go share it with an elder, right? Go buy their lunch, go help them with gas on the way home, and that creates that generosity, that sharing, and that's not just with monetary, but with knowledge, with kids coming up to me, hey Pat, how did you do that dance move? You know when you did this? It's like, oh yeah, this is how you do it. And then to spend time with that younger kid, and then Marissa and I will run, hey, that kid's dancing. We'll go watch them. Oh, you did it! Yeah, that's so cool.
And then they come back and say, did you see me do it? And that is so beautiful too. That one of the things that we both didn't have growing up was role models. Not only did we not have parents, but we didn't have role models. We didn't have people in Hollywood that looked like us, or people in magazines that looked like us, or people with the same sort of story that we had. There was no one like that. So anytime that we get a chance to speak into anyone, especially younger minds that are forming, is that we take that very serious, and that we hold those things so close to our hearts.
One thing that came to mind, and I felt like I needed to share it about powwow and just our people in general, how they see us as very stoic. Like you'll see the warriors. Sometimes there's some men dancers that look really intimidating, like my brother Donnie Rain and Doug Rain, they look, but when you actually talk with them, they're gentle and they're nice, but they look really intimidating. And Tommy was talking about, that it's not because we were stoic. It was because in our life, how Indigenous people were taught, and this is what he said to me, was in a non-Indigenous kind of religion, they talk about death as a way to control you on how to act and stuff like that. But for us Indigenous, we were always preparing to meet our relatives, and that we have to just live a good life as we could and treat others really well in our preparation to meet our relatives. So we weren't afraid of death. So we had that. It wasn't that we were stoic, but we were brave. We were brave and we were ready. And so I was reading the book, what is it called? Black Elk. And Black Elk, he was talking about how and he was around this area of Wounded Knee, right? And so they were always battling. And when the warriors went out to battle, they would say, it's a good day to die. It's a good day to meet my ancestors. And it wasn't that they were afraid, and they had that bravery to them. And I just thought I had to bring that up with this.
Another thing I wanted to quickly add was powwow has really brought so much healing in our own personal journeys. When Patrick lost his dad, that was an outlet for him, and he did take time off, but getting back into that, losing himself in his dance, that was healing for him. For me, just feeling connected to my kukum again in everything that I make, I miss her a lot. But that, I have access to her there, and I have access to my ancestors before that, and I have access to them creating. And we also wanted to introduce people to culture who were like us, who didn't know where to start, who I can't go to my mom and dad and talk about a powwow. They barely come. And I can't go to, there's a lot of my mom's siblings, they just still not something that they practice often. And so I don't have like someone I could go to, when it comes to that. And POW has given us that. And we also just wanted to say, if there's people like us who don't know where to start, here's dancing. Okay, here is an intro into the Cree language. Here is how to put your regalia on. And that's where POW Times formed. And my position with my job is also the program coordinator for the Red Deer Aboriginal Dance Troupe, which is a agency out of Red Deer, and we get to really dive into culture with families, Indigenous families or foster families, anyone who wants to learn about the culture. And we get to provide workshops and have people that we know or people in our community come and teach these things. And this does not feel like work. This feels like me being who I am.
Like Marissa said, if we could just get people who are looking for their belly button, that Nixigas, and where they come from, who they are, what they're passionate about. For us, it was POW was our first step in, because we didn't know where to go. And so we're so grateful to this world of powwow, and the people that we've met, the places that we've got to see,
The lessons we're learning.
lessons, that we wanted to share that with the world. And so I recorded one powwow drum group, and I created a Facebook page called Powwow Times, and I shared it, and I couldn't believe the reaction. We want more. I was like, what? And I started posting more and more and more. Since then, we reached millions of people, that people who don't necessarily have access to it, but they're looking for their belly button. They find just a small piece of it in a video and a song, that it gives them inspiration to go to a powwow or to an elder, or to learn, where do I come from? What is my heritage? What is my language? What is my, to sit down with those people, or even just start that journey, which I think is very beautiful. And so for us, it's been just a passion thing to get it out to as many people who need it as we needed it.
Yeah.
And we're fortunate because of this. It brought us into the Red Deer community. We were doing so much work outside of the community, and we didn't know that there was kind of a community here that we were able to tap into, to be even here speaking, to meet Kukamegi and to learn from her. And we have awesome little side projects that we're trying to get going so we can learn a lot of her knowledge, and so we could, you know, help share that with the youth as well and other people that we serve. And so this exhibit that you're going to see is kind of like our report card of where we are right now, and what we learned, and the people we've come to know, and to share it with people within our community. So with that, we're going to Basego, stand up, and we're going to walk to our exhibit and kind of see it now. This is the last part of our presentation here. Hopefully you guys soaked everything in, got to look around, maybe you have some questions, which is really, really cool. So one day I was on Facebook, and I was scrolling on Facebook, and this, you know how everything kind of moves up on Facebook like that? I seen this museum call for submissions, and I went back down. I was like, oh, what is this? And we always had this idea of this picture of what you guys see now. But what was happening prior to that was we were going into schools, and I would teach about the fancy dance, and I'd teach about women's fancy, I'd teach about the grass and the jingle, and the students really loved that. And part of that presentation, we'd have live dancers, so that fancy dancer would dance, men's traditional, women's traditional, and we would dance, but also teach what this dance, the story that we heard. And so the fancy dancer would dance, and I'd tell the students, say this dance comes from Oklahoma, from the horse spirit, and just give them kind of good surface knowledge enough for them to want to take further steps into their learning. And so when I seen that submission for the museum submissions, I immediately told Marissa about it, and we had the idea to write it all out and to have this picture, kind of this big picture of kind of what this would look like. And it's very similar to what we've seen in our minds. And so we sent that off, and we didn't hear back. And we're like, oh, maybe they don't want to do it, you know? And then so we just still went about teaching what we could. We're in schools, we're in universities, we're in different towns, different reservations, and we teach this. And we were getting more knowledgeable every single time we went somewhere, because we'd find an elder like Kukamegi who would sit down with us and say, this is what they heard, and this is what they heard. And we're starting to get really excited because we're starting to learn more and more about powwow, more and more about the dances. And then a year went by, and I get this email, hey, Patrick and Marissa, would you guys come to Red Deer Museum and let's talk about this exhibit? And I was like, Marissa, they got back to us, they might want to do it, let's go. And we're jumping around, we're excited. We came and we sat down with the museum. We started talking about this project. What would it look like? And for them, and for us as well, it was a big project to do. And they were thinking, okay, let's talk about it. Let's do it maybe 2 or 3 years down the line. And I was so ambitious. I was like, we could have it done this year. Like, what? Really? So give us a year and let's figure it out. Because when you were, like I said earlier today when we were talking, we're traveling so many places, we're meeting so many people that I know who makes roaches, the garb that you see on top of the head, made for the porcupine. I know that person who makes this. Marissa knows the person who makes the sewing, the seamstress, the jingle dress outfits, the grass dance outfits. She knows that person because of where we travel. All the feather work that you see, we know that person because of talking with people and traveling, increasing our network of people that we know. So we were very, very confident that we could deliver this within a time period because of the people that we've come to know. And so when we got the go-ahead, okay, let's start getting the artist contracts going, that we created a powwow of people, of ourselves, that who could deliver this project. And so we contacted 11 artists. Was it 11 artists?
I think so.
About there, yeah. And we have them all on the walls of the artists. There they are in the corner. And it was a lot of conversation back and forth. And what you find with powwow, sometimes it's hard because as an artist, and Marissa could talk about this, you're also a mother, a father, a full-time worker in your job. Maybe you're in education and you have a classroom, that you have to find the little bit of extra time that you have to create something. You want to talk a little bit about that, how that process is?
Yeah. So I created a couple of the pieces in here. And so I am a full-time mom. And then when we signed on for the project, I was working full-time for Powwow Times. And then I also did beadwork as another sort of source of income. And just juggling everything back and forth between the orders that I had and then the ones that we created was really, really tough. So that means, so this is another thing that Powwow's given me is really how I have to manage my time. So I have to wake up at a certain time if I want to create, but then also the priorities are definitely work, but also making sure that my family didn't suffer. And so a lot of these artists and a lot of Indigenous artists, this is their main source of income. And so when we had asked them to be a part of it, we were very, very lucky to have all these creative minds be willing to work with each other and also to dedicate that time. And Pat said you have to find time, but you have to dedicate time to your craft. And this is definitely out of all the projects that Pat and I have done, this is definitely the one that we're the most proud of. And when we wrote for it, we had to have sort of this goal in mind that we wanted any young artist, any Indigenous person to walk into this space and say, this has inspired me to do this. Or non-Indigenous, I learned something so beautiful. Or I changed the perspective that I have on Indigenous culture. Or I don't feel the same way that I may have if I had not learned about this. Pat and I both have this really, we are so passionate about youth, and we always had them. And where we come from in our story leading up to this is that we hope that it inspires anyone to, if you come from nothing, or the amount that you struggled, that there are spaces for you to be you. And that was one of the major goals that we had coming into this.
One of the tricky parts of doing this, and you're collaborating with so much artists, is like color coordination. You know, someone's doing a project in Montana and the other is doing it in northern Saskatchewan, to match those ideas up to create an outfit that's in sync. One of the reasons why Marissa and I work so well is, for her, she's real particular and she can see the fine details of things. And me, I can't. I'm more like, let's get it done and figure it out. And so when we come together, you get the speed process of it getting done, but also those fine details at the same time, which is really good. So in terms of modernized world, I'll write a grant. and it's just done. And then Marissa will be like, "Hey, you missed this, and then it just becomes a good package, right?" So just to think of it like that, and getting that collaboration and everyone working in synergy to create this was a whole process in itself. And as Marissa said, we're hoping it inspires people. It also inspired us to be like, we can even think bigger and reach more people and do bigger things just from doing something like this. And what we found I work in a school division in central Alberta, that there's a stereotype of Indigenous people. There is a way of people look at Indigenous people. And when we talk about the traumas that our people went through with residential schools and finding their belly button, that Niksigasan, being lost and not knowing their language, not knowing their culture, and going through that where that blood memory is there from the residential schools, where all that pain happened. And so some of these Indigenous people that you might see around, if they are looking for their belly button still and where they come from, and they're using maybe alcohol or drugs to help with that pain, that as a whole, someone who sees that might think that's all Indigenous people, right? And they'll have that perspective. And in central Alberta, working in the school divisions in this area, I find it's because not a lot of these small towns are connected with reservations, because they're kind of in the Calgary area or down south in the Edmonton area. We're kind of in an area here where you might not see a reservation and be connected with a lot of Indigenous peoples to change a perspective. So us moving in here from Saskatchewan and working with the schools and knowing our kids are in this system, in this area, we want to help change that perspective. That if they see us walking into a school as totally the opposite of what they think an Indigenous person is, and we help change that perspective, that it will break those relationship blocks that we have, because reconciliation is always a forefront in what we do as well, and changing those perspectives and bringing this beautiful culture and a Nehio Mamtanichigane Bachita, Indigenous way of thinking, into our places.
And a lot of that came from learning about Powwow, that vets came back. They lost everything. They lost their status, and then the government didn't take care of them either. They lost absolutely everything, but they still fought for us to celebrate this way. And that's what we're doing. Mm-hmm. We're going to do everything that we can to change narratives for this next 7 that's coming in behind us, that we are making we're doing any work that we can around that.
Mm-hmm. So with that, the project came together. We're here today. Let's talk about the dances and what you guys see here. Let me give you guys a little bit. I want to give you intentionally surface knowledge, because I want you to take that upon yourself to be like, I want to learn more, to watch the videos, to sit down with elders, and to actually go through that journey, right? So I think we'll start.
This one?
Sure.
Okay, well, sorry. So I did the beadwork for this, and if you get a chance to watch the videos, the fancy dance originates from that horse spirit. So with that, I went really, really back to basic, and the cape here itself is a horse mask to represent that horse spirit. So this is a horse mask. If you get a chance to look at it, that's what that is. And I really wanted to use nature type of elements. Like I wanted to have some softer earthy tones. So, but then I also wanted to be a little bit more contempt. So there's two-tone teal in here, and I kept the original, the flowers, and this is sort of what I created for the men's fancy. The seamstress here is Emery Assiniboine, and she really matched up what I was doing. The florals here she took from the beadwork, and the horse, again, paying our respect to the horse spirit in this. So Eric Mentuck, he also did the feathers, and then our friend Yasi, the roaches here as well.
Do you guys remember that story I said about the nunchucks and Michelangelo? These are the sticks basically I've seen when I first seen it. And And the bingo dabber, was this, but obviously this is not made out of bingo dabber. They custom dye these. So these feathers actually come from the neck of a rooster, right? And then the longer feathers back here are from the turkey. So it evolved over time using more like modernized things that we have access to. The roach itself is made from the porcupine, and the smaller hair is from a deer tail. And what they do is you dye these colors, certain colors to match kind of who you are. And Elder Sharon Baptiste talked about, we dress so nice now in powwows because our spirit likes it. Our spirit feels good when you dress up in your finest regalia. And so you dress as nice as you could. And so the elements that you see is a reflection of the artist, as Marissa will make flowers, right? The flowers she's seen in her Gukum's backyard when she walked out of her house. And the feather work, we talked about goals. We have this big picture of a goal, but you can't just make this overnight. That if you just do section after section after section, eventually you're going to have a bustle, right? So you would actually cut up the turkey feather, put a dowel in, tape it up, put some zip ties at the bottom, and you're wrapping every single feather in there, right, to make it the design that it is.
How much time do you think went into bustles and armbands and such?
Mm-hmm.
How much time?
Well, it's a lot like your beadwork. So because you're so skilled, you could do it a lot quicker than someone who's kind of just getting started.
Mm-hmm.
So like a bustle itself, probably a month if you really just did it. But if you're really skilled at it, maybe a week, right? So that's the men's fancy from the Oklahoma area, the Choctaw, Chickasaw people. We'll talk about this. Yeah.
All right. This next one is the Women's Trad by Nita, Nora, and Prairie Rose McAdam. An awesome family that beads together. The mom is Cree, and she's out of Whitefish, and their style here it really represents that older sort of Cree feel, the vibes here. And this buckskin is one of the most beautiful regalias I've ever seen, and I've seen quite a few in my life. They did this hide on their own. They did absolutely everything, the wraps and the whole piece. So this is a one piece. I had a question about that earlier. And they took the elements, so that Cree again here, and you can really tell when some of these older ones. The purse here on its own, just the detail that they worked. And then the quill worker, so this is all quilt, and the quills come from a porcupine again. And that artist is Kendra Rowan, and she is a quill artist out of Muscatcheese, and she learned from her uncle, I believe, and he is an unreal quill worker. And every time that she creates something, she says, she gives Yasi the credit for teaching.
Mm-hmm. So this dance as well is like the oldest out of all these dances in terms of the women dance. This is kind of very similar to what you would see when they first started dancing. Is like they would be in their buckskin dresses, very not as flashy as the other ladies here, and they would be on the outside supporting the men. And slowly they started coming into the dancing circle, dancing, and they wanted to show that they could dance just like the men, just as fast as the men. They could do what they were doing, and they started dancing this as they started coming in. So this is one of the first women dances that you would actually see.
Yeah. And also now, like it's quite a bit more evolved from the way that this looks, but sometimes if you're at a powwow, there's a women's fancy special that you'll see this is being danced there as sort of like an older style representation. So if you get a chance to come stand close to it, take a sniff on the arm. It smells so good.
The next dance are men's traditional, and men's traditional is basically what you would see when they came back from battle, when they came back from a hunt. They would tell their stories, and if you ever talk to an old hunter, when they're going into battle, they're not moving straight forward they're kind of going in a serpentine manner. And if you ever go to a powwow and you'll see, if you actually observe the men's traditional, they won't dance forward. They'll kind of sneak up on their enemy, going side to side. And you'll be like, oh, I know that, right? You'll see that. And they have a couple different songs that are just in particular to this dance. One is called a sneak up. And when the sneak up is going, you'll hear the rumbling of the drum, and what they're doing is they're sneaking up on an elk or a moose or their enemy. And they're sneaking, they're looking, and you'll kind of know what they're doing, but they're also telling a story. This is what happened when I went out with my uncle hunting. This is what happened when I went to war. This is what happened when I counted coup. I would talk about counting coup. And then they have a song called the Duck and Dive. So the song's going, and then boom, song's going, boom, the gunshots. And what they're doing is they're getting down, they're dancing, kind of ducking from the gun bullets that are coming by, or the arrows, right? To have that duck and dive and that sneak up. So these are our warriors who are telling their stories. They're telling about that battle, and they come back. And basically that's part of how Powwow started, was that victory after. That victory that they're still living, that victory that they had a successful hunt, that victory that they came back from battle, they counted coup, they're celebrating. That's part of this. Again, kind of things that really, really, where you could go to a powwow and you'll know who the traditional dancers are, is they have this nice big bustle in the back, usually made of eagle feathers. They have weapons in their hands, right, to talk about that battle. A lot of times they're painted up in a certain way that was given to them. And they have the shields, right, for arrows and things like that when they're coming. So that's how you could tell who a men's traditional dancer is when you're at a powwow.
So the next one is a men's grass, and Corley says the artist here. Pat talked a little bit about the dance, and there's different, and again here there's still different stories. There's a Cree version for this dance, and there's the one that comes from where the dance originates in Omaha. So there's so many different versions here, and you can tell that the style that this person read it in, that she's a different tribe than what mine is. So these things in here, so these are teepees in here, but they can really be telling a whole family story, or they could be telling a whole story in itself just on this beadwork. A story that's specific to this person or their family or their tribe or someone linked or related to them.
So kind of some of the stories that Marissa was talking about the grass, is they were like our scouts. Hey, can you go check out the east? We're going to travel there. Go there first to see if it's safe for our community to travel that way. And they would go out. And the cool thing about the grass dancers is they could get camouflaged within the environment because they'd move like the grass while they're scouting. And they would sway and so when someone looked that way, it's almost like they blended in with the earth and you couldn't see them. So they were our scouts, they're our warriors that went out. And they would actually, they say that before we go somewhere, that they would dance to pack down the area and bless the grounds before we set up camp. And so they would come and they would dance and pat down the grass for everyone, so then the women could come up and set up the teepees like that. And some of our artists that were involved also is Curtis Miller, who does the furs and kind of the wood accessories that you see. He's from British Columbia, and he's a really good carver, and he does big masks that you'd see in museums in BC, but he also creates the accessories for this and the bells that you would see.
So it's not, it doesn't happen at every powwow, but it does happen often, what Pat just described, where they go in, pat the grass down and it stays so that the women can come. But at a powwow, sometimes they'll call all the grass dancers before the powwow starts or before band entry starts, and they have all the grass dancers do an exhibition in the middle, and then that's sort of that blessing. Another thing is sometimes, so these eagle feathers, they're never supposed to touch the ground. And sometimes they do fall. And when that happens, it's only picked up by a veteran, because that represents someone who went to war and never came back. That no one can just pick it up, but it has to be someone who's given that right.
Mm-hmm. And Elder Tommy Christian said it's also sometimes a good thing that that feather has fallen, because what it does, it teaches the dancer, next time I'm going to take care of my outfit a little better. Next time I'm going to put it back a little better. So it actually improves the person after. And a lot of times you'll see at a powwow, if someone drops a feather, they feel bad about it. So next year they'll come back to that same powwow and they'll have a special where they give back to the community. So they'll actually, their family will come up with monetary prizes, blankets, everything that they could give within their limits as who they are to give back. Say, sorry, I didn't take care of my outfit. Next time I'm going to do better, and I'm going to give back because I had to stop the powwow in order to pick up this feather. And I'm sorry I took that time. I'm going to give back this way next year.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes, depending on who it is or how many times or the situation, so you may or may not get the feather back. The next one here is women's jingle, and probably one of the most popular dances, I'd say. At any given powwow, you will see this category packed, stacked, so many. And there are so many different, so there's a contempt version, which is this, and there's an old style version. And the old style version, they do not wear any feathers or they don't carry the fan. So this is contempt, and you would be able to tell that she's contempt because of the feathers. So if you go to a powwow and there's a dancer with no feathers and they don't really kick high, and they're the ones that just sort of keep their feet always on the ground. There's so many amazing jingle dress dancers out there, and if you guys get a chance to do the YouTube thing, definitely Google and really check out the difference in the styles.
So this dance comes from East, right? And it was a dance to heal a sick child, and it was a vision that came in a dream. And they saw this in the dream, that the ladies were dancing for them in a jingle dress, and that if they performed that ceremony, that child would be healed. And sure enough, when they actually took on their dream and created the outfits and they danced, that child became healed through it. But a real cool story is the original jingle dress is their feet didn't leave the ground because they didn't want to disrupt that connection to Mother Earth.
And also with the belief that the earth has everything to be healthy and to heal.
Mm-hmm. So if you guys look at indigenous ceremonies, the giveaways, the feasts, they're all sitting on the ground. The sun dances, sometimes they'll dance and they'll take off their moccasins and just dance because they want that connection to Mother Earth, knowing that the earth, like Marissa said, will provide all the healing we need. And my mom said, when you go out in nature, put out some tobacco, because why? We're stepping over medicines that you might not even know. Right? That's like this dance, that connection, that healing, that medicine.
So this one in particular, the jingles, a cool story about this part of the regalia. The jingles are made by Emily McKinney, and Emily McKinney it is Anishinaabe, where the dance originates from. And she created these jingles as a way to really revive the meaning of this dance and this story. But also, she gives the portion of the sales back to support families of missing and murdered Indigenous women, men, and girls. So, really, really awesome artists all around. This one is a local favorite for sure. So the men's chicken does come out of Treaty 7 and has a really, really cool story.
And also, I guess the Cree too had a version of the men's chicken. So what's really cool is you look at men's fancy, it comes from Oklahoma. You see the men's traditional, that Watsunaman comes from the Sioux people, and the grass dance from the Omaha. This one is we could take almost a little bit of ownership in this area, that it comes from this area of Saskatchewan, Alberta, that men's chicken. And I want you to come to the exhibit and learn about the minced chicken, but I want to touch on it just enough so you have a good understanding. But it's a mating dance. So basically, you're dancing as in courtship to find that mate. And if you ever watch a prairie chicken or a grouse when it's mating, it sticks its chest out, it shakes its feathers, it makes these noises and sounds, and it's really trying to attract the mate. If you watch this dance at a powwow, you're gonna see that they mimic that same movement as a prairie chicken mating. And you see he has a mirror kind of showing how handsome he is when he dances, that he's trying to show that woman or that counterpart of how handsome he is so he can attract a mate. And that was all in a dream. A lot of these dances, they came from a dream or a vision, right? So this dance, he actually, this wasn't part of the dream. He actually went out hunting because he wanted to feed his family. And he's seen those prairie chickens doing that dance, that mating dance. But being hungry, pulled out his bow and arrow and he killed that prairie chicken, took it home, and they ate good that day. That spirit of that prairie chicken came to him in a dream as a human and said, you know what you just did? I was in the middle of my ceremony trying to attract a mate, and you interrupted it. And so he almost like threatened him, saying, you know, you're going to have to carry on this ceremony because it needed to be completed. And so he taught him the dance and the songs that go with it, and he showed it to his tribe, and then that's how that chicken dance kind of evolved. And you'll see that they mimic that prairie chicken courtship.
All right. And then this one is the Women's Fancy. And Alexandria Pasquayak did the beadwork for this, and she is from South Dakota. So her work will mimic the tribe that she's from. And the cloth parts are Emery, Assiniboine, Nikin. And the Women's Fancy is the dance that I do. And also happens to be the dance that kind of is sort of the first maybe women's rights kind of movement. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when we're talking about powwow, when it was coming back in the early 50s, 1950 area, and women were not necessarily too much a part of powwow. And when I said the women traditional were dancing on the outside, they started pushing in, saying, hey, we can dance as well, right? And so the Women's Fancy was that woman who said, you know, that they were standing up for, that they could be a part of it as well, which is really cool. And it's now more, this style right here, we'd say like the most modern dance now out of the women. And you'll see a lot of movements with their kicks and their spinning and their dancing fast songs and also graceful at the same time. They'll call it the women's graceful shawl sometimes as well because of how smooth they could dance and how they could just float. They float across the dance floor, and it's such a beautiful, beautiful thing to watch. Marissa does a really good rendition of it, the women's double beat. So it's kind of like a kind of beat, and you just kind of glide to it. And Marissa does it very, very well. So we also, in this area where we're at, saw that there was a lack of opportunity for youth to learn this stuff and to learn how to dance it. And so we found an organization called the Red Deer Aboriginal Dance Troupe, and Marissa, maybe you could talk a little bit about that and how you've been able to help teach this to the youth in this area.
So the dance troupe has been in operation since 2004, and it was originally by a few men, and they just started to sing, and they didn't have a space, they didn't have people to teach them, they didn't have anything like that, but they just wanted to sing and caught some momentum, and they were allowed to be in a place where they could practice. And some of the people that had lived in the area went, and they just had a space. So people were dancing, and these guys were learning how to sing, and just continued to grow from there. And last year, a position opened to lead the group, and it was just perfect because this is something that we've always done and that we are so invested and involved in. So the dance troupe, currently now we get to deliver programs that are based in or around dance, regalia, and singing. And these workshops happen on a monthly basis, and then we also have a thing called the community practice, which brings out almost over 100 people pre-COVID, 100 people every single time. Over that, and even throughout that, our membership was continuing to grow this year, just based on doing all the workshops and having all these knowledge people come in and really deliver really beautiful lessons. So definitely check that one out on Facebook, the RDADT page.
And so it's just been our initiative now to share Powwow because of what it's done for us. We feel like it could be that value to other people as well. So look at Red Deer Aboriginal Dance Troupe on Facebook or Powwowtowns on Facebook, and you'll have a door in. Step into the Powwow world, the Indigenous culture, the language, the history, the dance styles. And now we just want to kind of open it up if there's any questions. Because
traded the sky for a string of painted ponies. Not much left of our language and stories. Kids are the key, they took us away. Locked us in schools to bring a brighter day. All the things we used to know, all of them gone, gone with the buffalo.